This. Hi, everyone. Just a reminder, this will be recorded. I would certainly love for you to use this if you have any need for it in the future, or to share it with other artists and students who might be interested. We are going to go ahead and get started. And I will leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions if you have any. I will share some information in the chat as well. I just wanted to introduce our two participants today, and then we'll jump right in. So, oh, Kevin, I might just mute you. There. Okay, great. All right. So thank you for joining us today. Artists Marjee Levine and Stacey Holloway are here to pick up our ongoing conversation about casting in support of our current exhibition, Branching Out, which is open at the Metal Museum through September 8th. Marjee and Stacey are both artists, educators, and friends, and today the two will share their artistic practices and distinct perspectives. Both are longtime supporters of the Metal Museum. Recently, Stacey attended the 2024 Fire Conference in Memphis. She serves as Associate Professor of Sculpture at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. And Marjee is the Assistant Professor of FA3D Sculpture at MassArt. She is also the co-founder and president of Eutectics Arts in Beverly, Massachusetts. You can catch Marjee's interview with Laura Mullen-Vermillier on the podcast Iron. I'll share that link in the chat. Both artists are accessible on Instagram, and I'll share their Instagram handles here in the chat, as well as their academic and project websites. Thank you for joining us as we continue a fresh conversation around the state of contemporary casting. Before we begin, I'd also like to thank the Hyde Family Foundation and the Wingate Foundation for our exhibition and programming support, and of course, Arts Memphis and the Tennessee Arts Commission for their ongoing operating support. Thank you also to our members and donors. Your support makes today's programming possible. If you are interested in becoming a member or renewing your membership, you can do so here at the link that I've pasted in the chat. Like I said, our current exhibition, Branching Out, is open through September 8th, and it considers contemporary casting through paths of training, influence, and shared knowledge that branch out like a family tree. When the three of us, Marjee, Stacey, and myself, when we were preparing for today's talk, our conversation quickly turned to the state of the field, and particularly women in the casting world. We started to circle around questions like, do women still feel isolated in casting? Is there an assumption of difference, or is that no longer there for women in the field? I will now open up the floor to Marjee and Stacey, and we will leave about 10 minutes at the end of the talk for questions from attendees. And there is a hidden woman in this photograph that I've circled here. Surprise, there's Marjee. Okay, so I'll open it up now to you, Stacey and Marjee. Thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just let you go, Marjee.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, so I think it's interesting when, when Laura's referencing the pre-conversation that we had about this, and one of the first things that came up, Laura said, like, I was interested in having you and you and Stacey because you're like prominent women in the field, blah blah blah, and both Stacey and I cringed, and I think that's a really interesting place to start, actually, because I think that was not the response that you were expecting, Laura, right? And Stacey and I have had the opportunity to have multiple conversations about this over the years, and I think we come at it from similar vantage points with slightly different experience. But I think that that's sort of an important precedent to start, is that oh, female ironcaster label is kind of like, oh god, right? Go, Stacey.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always label us as like we're the non-feminist feminists because it's just like whenever we'll get invited to female pours or female only exhibitions, it's kind of like a stab where it's like you're only being invited to this because you are a female in the iron casting field, not because you are a good iron caster. And so I think that also in the past definitely has been an issue, but definitely recently I'm feeling like there's more females in iron casting than there are, or females and female presenting iron casters than there are males, especially in teaching positions. I mean, I can't throw a rock here in Alabama without hitting another female sculpture professor. So I think stuff like that kind of became the topic of what we were discussing last week. And, you know, Marjee and I are pretty tough. We can handle it. But I also think that maybe this might, you know, might create some conversations with some of the younger students because, or younger casters, because sometimes people don't feel that way, which is totally fine.
So to me, that starts opening questions, right? That it's, you know, like I can only speak for myself and how I chose to sort of navigate my career coming up in the iron casting world, which is 20 plus years now, right? I grew up in this field essentially as an adult. But instead of saying like, oh no, it's just, you know, like it's not a problem for women anymore, like it starts opening up questions of like, are there still issues of equity and inclusion, and why, and you know, where is that occurring? But more so, is it even a gendered thing, or is it just otherness, right? Is it size? Is it physicality? Is it temperament? And Stacey's right that, you know, that like by the numbers, it's actually pretty evened out, if not, you know, sort of swung the other way. And that specifically is because our community is and always has been tied to academia, and art school especially is predominantly female now, which is a whole different issue as far as access and equity and inclusion that we might get to later, of like only people that are fortunate or privileged enough to go to art school are actually being ferried into this world. And that's creating some barriers. I don't like gatekeeping of any kind. So I think that's where all of these questions started coming up, is like, what is the state of anyone who is still perceived as other within the community? And, you know, where do we go from there? Right. Yeah. But I think I can only speak for myself, but I think that my reaction to all of that, like, oh, you know, we should have an all-female poor thing, is that I refuse to other myself, right? If you show up at all of these things and say, well, I'm a girl and I can do this, you know, and we don't need the guys, like you're intentionally othering yourself. And my headspace, that didn't align with what made sense in my head, right? In what I was perceiving was, if you work hard and you prove yourself, then you get accepted. So why would I set myself apart from doing that? Right.
Yeah, and I think that that's just also us, you know, Marjee and I's particular perception, because there are a lot of casters within the field that are very proud of what they're doing, and might still see it as a male dominant field. But I think that's great still. Like if you, Marjee and I don't really see ourselves as another, but I really think it depends on how you were raised and your upbringing in art school and stuff like that, because I think Marjee and I just kind of like I fell into sculpture. I was a realistic painter and then I got really tired of it, and then I had a grinder and made sparks in 3D design, and I was like, ooh. But what was most interesting to me about sculpture was the fact that I was doing a lot of self-portraits, and I could do a self-portrait without using my own figure necessarily. You can still do that too, but I was using recognizable imagery and things like that to kind of tell a story about a certain part of my identity, which but I think I also fell in love with the fact that anything and everything is material that you can use, and you're not limited to a very specific thing. But when I went to school, there actually let's see, when I started at Heron, I was there, it was a equal amount of men to female, male to female people in sculpture, and we all just helped each other out. And I don't know where I'm going with this though, but if we're ready to talk about that yet.
So
I just wasn't sure if you wanted pictures of you from
well, that's
earlier.
grad school, not under. No.
Okay, here, I'll go back. I'll go back.
I don't think anybody
I'm
wants
getting
to see the
dizzy.
pictures of me from undergrad. Still the same haircut though. No.
So I think, so I had a different experience when I was younger. And I'm going to slightly disagree with Stacey. So I totally classify myself as other or recognize my own otherness in multiple different ways, not just gender or size or weight or whatever, right? But I refuse to let that become a label, right? So there's a fine line there. I don't know if that makes sense, right? So I'm not going to sit here and say like, no, I'm not other. I'm just going to do everything I wanted, but like I am very much everywhere I go. I'm always the misfit and I'm always the other, but that's not how I'm going to introduce myself. I'm just going to walk in and say, I'm competent, right? And you're not getting rid of me.
Mhm.
So, which usually works. But when I was coming up in school, it was, it was fairly mixed demographically. That was fine. But like, I distinctly remember attending my first Iron Conference, which would have been like the third international, which was in New Jersey. We're talking about like the late 90s, right? I can't keep all those dates straight now, but it was like mid-late 90s. And I walked onto those grounds and for the first time ever really felt like a minority, right? Even though in other aspects of my life I am one, that was like this shockingly, right? I can count the number of women that are here on one hand. And then you're looking through the program and you're looking at like all of the names of, the steering committee and the people who are presenting on panels, and like, there's no women in positions of power, right? So it was this really shockingly stark thing. But that's still, and that's where the reaction of, the few women that were around in the field at the time, I think needed the camaraderie of like, we're going to have Women Fire and Iron Conference. We're going to have these women only events because like you seek out your own, you got to find kinship, you find your people. Right. But that it didn't quite make sense to me. Right. And so therefore, not only am I other because I'm a 5 foot tall girl, but I'm also not hanging out with the other women because I'm not angry enough. Right. This is like the women with a Y generation too, which really sucked. But I am a bad feminist. So anyway, it was like, I think my assessment was that what does this community value? Right? We value hard work and we value teamwork and we value knowledge, technical knowledge and proficiency. So all of those things I can achieve in my own way, despite my physicality. Does that clarification make sense to you guys? I hate talking into the void on Zoom. Do you guys yes?
Yeah. And I think this is
Yeah.
where we were talking about the other day too, where kind of growing up in the field was different for you and I. I kind of just am nosy, Midwestern, and oh, hey, what you guys doing? I want to watch, I want to learn. And I just kind of got my nose in there and just learned all that I could, anything that I thought was interesting. And I think that's, I think this is where we were talking about like the idea of just like confidence, right? And I think I was just always confident enough to assume that people would want to share their information with me. Not always the case, but I think that definitely in our community, it's like everybody's so generous with their time and knowledge. And so I think that my biggest, probably where I am to, how I got to where I am is just because I got right in there, wanted to know everything, and then tried everything, experimented, and found the things that I liked to do and worked with those. And I think that you might have had a different experience, Marjee.
I did, in the sense that I am not bubbly and Midwestern. I'm actually really shy and a quintessential Bostonian, right? I mean, the picture that's up on you can see the like, I might kill you in your sleep eye gaze there, right? Like resting bitch face is a really hard thing. So, and I'm actually painfully shy, despite what most people might say about me, who know me in our community. So I was that, like, stand in a corner and just observe everything, and then go do, sort of obsessive research, not sort of, and start figuring it out. And a lot of it was just logic, right? And this is what drew me to the field, is that not only is it a sane use for insanity and like justified pyromania, which is freaking great. It's like, I got to use my brain to figure out how to make a place for myself in this discipline that I don't belong in. Like, by all rights, I don't belong, right? I'm not big enough. I'm not strong enough. I may or may not hurt my ovaries. That was actually a quote from someone at one point, that like I shouldn't do that because I'd hurt my ovaries. That was good. So I take them. But so this building of identity, I loved what Stacey said, that you can make a self-portrait without it being a portrait, right? And that's essentially what I've always done, is sort of this customized, like I had to make everything custom to be able to even participate, right? Because of course I was participating using equipment that was so out of proportion for my body, not just in the weight, but in like the scale of things, like shoulder width and grip, like the diameter of a tool, right? I learned to run a furnace by feel because I couldn't see into it because I wasn't tall enough. And this was not a time where I can hear my students now saying something to the effect of, this charging platform makes me really uncomfortable because it's not tall enough, right? Like there's this it's a different era now, but you wouldn't say that on a pour field. You either pick it up and do it, or you don't participate, right? So I picked it up and did it, and my back is mad at me now for that. And so that's where I learned how to use my brain instead of my back, right? That's where like I started building custom equipment, which doesn't sound like it was that revolutionary, but it kind of was.
Yeah, and this is where it's kind of like, that seems to be more of an issue than the being a female in the field, is making it so any body type can pour and do everything if they want. Just recently, and just kind of the idea that don't underestimate somebody that you don't know, like you might think they can't do something. But I just recently did a pour with Kristen Tordell Williams and at Sloss and her students, and I had a student that was 90 pounds soaking wet, and she wanted to pour. I said, well, why don't you dead end, because pouring takes a little bit of practice, and so I will be right here. I will be right here. She did not need me at all. She was like, I'm fine. Oh, this is fun, and had a blast. And I think that that's really important, too, is that if we start talking about like our body, Marjee, you said you have the herniated disc. I have a hairline fracture in my vertebrae, and it's just getting harder and harder to do stuff now. I wish I worked smarter when I was younger. But I think that, yeah, it comes to a point of what can be done. And I think there's so many things, like if you wanted to go to that slide, Laura, of where we use the crane. I might be getting ahead of ourselves, but
There you go.
yeah, where basically like more foundries are starting to look like this, where anybody can pour because most of the weight is being taken up by equipment and stuff like that. So this is at Heron School of Art and Design when I was teaching there before I went to UAB, and they had an incredible indoor system, foundry, and system with the gantry crane as holding the bulk of, like, the weight of this. I think we're pouring bronze and investment molds here. But just kind of like, and you could see there's, I think that one behind me is Heather, and she is very short. And the other student there, I think her name was Elizabeth, and she was also very tiny too. But I think that making sure that everybody can participate is really important. And I think that's where we kind of talk about Marjee and how she's custom built all this equipment.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like it's when we're talking about accessibility and everyone being able to participate, it's not just about weight too, right? So it's about, any kind of physical limitation, right? Any kind of, differently abled body. I had a student that had a seizure disorder. Like, we had to get this whole mess about, what's going to happen to them in the foundry. I've actually sewn together like quadruple but bandana type things to cover large amounts of synthetic hair, right? I have like the Kevlar balaclavas for religious purposes. Like, there's all sorts of considerations to make sure that that like the smallest barrier can be a deterrent, right? And you wouldn't want someone to be like, oh, well, I can't participate because I can't cover my head. Like, nope, I have that solution, no problem, right? It's almost like it's that no excuses thing kind of thing. And then of course there's that shyness factor too of like handing someone a job and saying, I need you to do this, right? And making everyone aware that all jobs are equivalently important, right? It's not just the person who's pouring that matters. It's everyone on the field working together, but not just saying, like, the way that I grew up was, it was a free for all, like, okay, everyone jump in, do what you got to do, or you would get like grabbed by the back of the collar and say, you do this, right? And that doesn't work for everybody, especially the shy people. So, so actually having a conversation saying, I need you to skim, right? And you're going to be really good at it because you're like a really precise person, right? And here's how we're going to do it. And then they have a job like it, that where you're not counting on someone to jump in of their own volition, because some people just won't, right? So it's really just, it's a complete change of mindset. It's not just about the weight. Right. We customize all of our pouring gear because it doesn't fit. I have teeny tiny students, right? That like the one size fits no one chaps are, you can like wrap around them twice. So we have like custom leather party days and all that kind of stuff. So yes, it involves equipment, and I'm happy to talk about customizing equipment, but it also is just like how you set the tenor of the shop, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, just open it up to know that everybody can, and to, I always want to make sure that my students feel comfortable doing whatever job they're being asked to do, because sometimes they're not comfortable, being around. I had a student that was like, I just can't do the heat, and I'm like, okay, like that's fine. You can help us do this and set up the pour floor, and there's always jobs for people to do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It also makes it more multidisciplinary too. Like, I love when we get, the fashion majors down in the foundry, because, they can help us with, like cool printed bandanas and, reworking our leathers, and we get all sorts of, fun illustrators design all of our t-shirts, but making sure that everyone that there's no hierarchy in like the cool jobs versus the not cool jobs, I think is really important. Right. Yeah.
And maybe creating an environment too, where if they want to do something, they feel comfortable enough to
Mhm.
ask, like, hey, can I do that? Like, will you help me do that? Or, I think that making sure that everybody feels like able to be a part of and asked to be a part of everything.
Mhm. Yep. I had somebody tell me a long time ago that using a crane was cheating, which is great. And I said, can we take a walk down to the industrial foundry and tell them that they're
Yeah,
cheating?
no kidding.
Like,
But cheating too is like cheating in what? Who can hold
cheating in like
who
not
can
lifting.
hold the ladle contest? Because who gives a shit? It's
Yeah.
not what we're doing. It's not what it's about. It's about the artwork. It's about the performance. It's about the camaraderie.
Yeah.
It's not about, yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. That one stuck in my head. There's a few of them that,
I
you
think
know,
the
most of it.
uterus comment is what's sticking in my head from
Oh
what
yeah, don't
I
lift that,
saw.
you'll
I'm
hurt
like,
your ovaries. That was a
what?
good one. Yeah. Another all-time favorite was I had just built whatever furnace. I don't remember, one of them in Georgia, and we were going to run it for the first time at the Christmas Iron Pour, and I was all excited, and it's like 7 feet tall. And so I recruited some people, everybody showed up to the Christmas Iron Pour. So this isn't like my colleagues, that's just who the hell came. But there was a handful of people that I recruited and to help me set up the furnace, and because I'm not that tall. And then we're sitting around chatting, and they were super cool, and they're like, oh, you built this? Yeah, I'm in grad school here, blah blah blah. And then they go, who's going to run it for you? And I like, I am. I'm And they were like, no, seriously. Like, okay. So they could accept that I built it. It's really strange. But again, like this goes back to that, like, if you get pissed, like, is that helpful?
Yeah.
I think that the proof there was, I'm going to run it, and I did, and it worked great, and they walked away seeing that, and that's all that needs to be said, right? Like, it doesn't have to be this big deal. But maybe.
I think that sometimes it can be, sometimes you've just had enough. Like
Yeah.
I think it depends on when I'm like what kind of mood I'm in. When like the guy on the truck is like, you drive that forklift pretty good for a girl. Some days I'm like, cool, thanks, and then other days I'm just like, you like, because sometimes you just get tired of it. But I agree, I feel better about myself when I don't let it ruin my day, but also, there's times where there are stuff that I can't do. There are things that I can't do. I think there was and we have an image of in grad school when I was doing the big crane in Wayne's studio. Yeah, so here I have a really big mold that I buried, so it's lower, but it was still kind of a little high. And normally I have no problem, getting that sucker started, but it was a full ladle, and I couldn't get it over because I think my strength starts from the shoulders down, but anything above my head, I really can't do anything. I can't drill, I can't do anything. And so here in this picture, I started to pour, couldn't get it. And then all of a sudden I start to, oh, okay, I got it. And I was really happy. And so in that picture, you can see that is Aaron Schmidt, who I went to grad school with. And he just helped me. He kind of he never said anything. I didn't know he did that until after I saw these photos. And I was like so proud of myself for actually getting it done. And then but I feel very happy that that was something that my friend, my colleague could help me out with, and it doesn't become a bragging point or a topic of a conversation that I wasn't strong enough, to get that bull ladle started. So, I don't know. I think that these are, yeah. And then if you go to the next slide, or the slide before that, I can't remember the next slide. That was it. See how proud I was? I was very proud. But yeah, so anyways,
Yeah. So some of the sort of like the things that I find really interesting about all of this, like from a sociological point of view, is like where, not denying any of like my experiences or Stacey's experiences, or people that came before us that paved different paths and all that kind of stuff, but like where does that mean that we're going, right? What does that mean for the iron community, casting community, the work that's coming out of that community? And if I put my educator hat on, that's sort of where my head goes. And a lot of it is like, is the history that has already, is what has already occurred even common knowledge anymore?
yeah, if
Which,
you want to,
there are some people who are trying to rectify that. And then are there other groups, other demographics, other, others out there that we, can and should be opening up this field to? That sounds horrible, because that sounds like we are the gatekeepers to the field, because we're not. But like, you don't look around, that experience that I had when I was 18, looking around going, I can count the number of women here, that's still happening. If you look at, I can count the number of African-American people here, I can count the number of transgender people here, right? Like, it's still happening. So like I'm kind of done with the, it's so hard to be a girl thing. And like, what other communities are we missing within our iron casting culture? Right.
yeah, and I think too that kind of what you were saying too about the other, like if you want to read an amazing story of being a female in a very, very dominant male field, read Mary Neubauer's letter in Marjee and Wayne and I's book, Letters, Warmest Regards, Letters to a Young Caster, because that, like, I cried when I first read it. I was just like, she's the reason why I'm here, like she paved the way, her
She talks
and
about,
many other people too, but it's just beautifully put. It's not like she was never seemed mad about it. She just like did the work,
shut up
and
to work.
here she is. Yeah, and I just love that kind of idea. But yeah, and I agree with Marjee. I do think that like we were saying, is that it's mostly been an academia related form. I think we've got so many other places starting to open up and do more things, that like Sauce Metal Arts, they have the summer apprenticeship, and they do a lot of things out in the community, which you can still come and take workshops and stuff. And then there's other foundries that just aren't related to a university, which is great. And I think Joe Bigley out in I'm gonna mess up, Western Iron Casting, Josephine Sculpture Park, it's the Metals Museum, people doing things, workshops, or at least introducing this idea. So if you went to and saw like the pour and did a scratch block at Metals Museum during fire, you see, okay, that sounds cool. Maybe next year I can sign up and be in the conference and take a workshop and then learn more, or, I think that doing stuff like that. But how do we get the word out, to underrepresented uh, people in our community, so that it's not so it's more diverse, and I think that doing more outreach and having more places do things like what the Metals Museum and Sloss and Sculpture Trails, what they're doing, could be the key to opening it up.
Or at least just acknowledging, like, there's, this is starting to borderline like we're gonna be the saviors of opening this all up to the to everybody, and that's that's unrealistic, but at least recognizing that, like, continuing to cry about like it's so hard to be me, like we're not the underrepresented demographic, like at least acknowledging that we have missing demographics within the community, right? We at least, like, step one, admit you have a problem, right? So I don't like sounding like we're trying to be anyone's savior, but because we're not. I'm just genuinely, I'm not that good of a person. So where are we going from here, Laura?
Well, I thought, I mean, it seems like, you
Yeah.
know, the next step might be to talk about, you
Oh,
kind of
duh.
hinted at these different programs that you've developed so the Metal Museum is about to launch Metal Marvels, which is a free summer camp for high school age students around Memphis that brings people in to learn about metal art and, you know, exactly what you're referencing. But the big one that we haven't talked about yet is your own Eutectic Arts.
Yeah, so I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now, it was right before COVID. Not right before, I co-founded a 501c3 nonprofit called Eutectic Arts, and we do small scale metal casting with teenagers and adults across the region, where it's a completely mobile workshop. So I custom built all this equipment so it packs up into a trailer. And we just do scratch blocks, right? Which is the easiest, accessible thing. But we are coming at this from both educational and mental health standpoint. So my co-founder is an occupational therapist who specializes in psychosocial trauma. And so we're really focusing on those therapeutic goals of like trust, teamwork, positive risk-taking, right? Self-actualization, all that kind of stuff. And really, we'll work with anybody, obviously, because anyone can enjoy and benefit from what we're doing, but we're specifically targeting programs that are run by the Department of Mental Health, Department of Children and Families, therapeutic schools, right? A teenager who has never had a stable home life. Imagine what that means when, they get to pick up and pour metal, like working in tandem with the person on the other side of that ladle. It can really be kind of a game changer. And so we're just really focused on like the act of transformation, both of the metal and of the human. And we travel around and do some stuff from time to time. It's in our spare time. We're both full-time educators. So, but yeah, that's why I love that the first slide, if you go back a couple slides, like the picture on that kid's face pretty much says it all, right? That was definitely an, oh my God. So we do little workshops and, maybe, it can be a door that can be open to, art school or any of the other STEAM kind of stuff. Like we actually have the students assemble all the equipment with us. It all comes out in pieces. So there are different points of entry. If, somebody may not care about the art making, but they really like the nuts and bolts of it all, literally. And, just the fire and the physicality and all that kind of stuff. So, it could make an impact for somebody, or it can just be a really fun day with a completely weird activity. And that's great too. So that's what we do. But that was a fun one to build. I put everything I learned over 20 plus furnaces into that baby.
Yeah, I feel like that face like represents the first time I saw, which was aluminum pour too. I saw it too. I was like, oh my God, it's like Terminator 2, but I don't think I ever grew up knowing that this was the thing that people did. You bought something metal at the store and that's the store made it happen, So I think that doing a process with people like you're saying is really going to help them think about like how do we get certain things too, because this is mostly from an industry. Like it wasn't until later that people started using it, well, not really, but started using it in art.
Yeah. Yeah, it's same. I mean, the first I saw a crucible, you know, getting pulled out of a furnace by a crane. And it was like this, I think I was, you know, barely 18, and it was this like glowing orb of enlightenment of, you know, everything I could have possibly wanted. All of my pyromaniacal hopes and dreams were contained in this like glow. And that was it. Like I was sold, but I didn't know, like you know, if you're fortunate enough to have a decent art program in like a public K-12 system, it's going to be drawing and painting, if it even exists, right? If there's anything three-dimensional, it's going to be clay. And this attracts a different type of person, right? It's why we all have found a home in this community. So for the right person to know that this exists, like, oh my God, I wish I had known. I would have been far less like destructive in my teenage years if I had like a positive way to channel all that. Use your powers for good. That's, I'm gonna stop there.
Yeah.
But that's what Eutectic Arts is, and it's a very cool little program that, you know, we're growing and it's fun. So there's just some fun pictures of some of the students doing stuff. We let them do everything. They charge the furnace, they pour, whatever. So there you go.
So when we were working on branching out, you know, developing the exhibit and the approach to it, and I was talking through like identifying these kind of tree branches of knowledge and trying not to totally map them onto just the academic system in America. You know, I was talking, I think Gary Pergolini he was on the call, he might have been dropped, but he's our current foundry apprentice, and he was describing like the experience of coming to the knowledge of casting and how that relates itself to the layout of casting. And he was like, imagine if you're just like walking through the woods and you come to a campfire and the people at the campfire are like, oh, hey, come have a seat. And I was like, that is the most warm and lovely metaphor for this field of art that is so elusive in a way and can be. I mean, there's certainly barriers to it. There's also, we haven't talked about the barrier of cost of participation. Like we've talked about participation in an academic program, but even the raw materials that you're using can be costly. And so not that, again, not trying to take on this hat of like being the savior, but I think it is worth talking about how can you invite more people in and teach them this craft in a way that they can go off and practice it with materials that aren't necessarily even metal. And that's something we talk about with our hands-on activities that have been developed at the Metal Museum, and like how we engage people beyond those who have the ability to come to every iron pour, every bronze, you know, every fire conference. And so, yeah, I think there's still barriers there, but an opportunity to gain access to this craft through like Eutectic Arts is just like one more way that people can do that. So,
and you're 100% right, but it's also it's a broader mindset too, right? Like even if someone participates in, you know, my program or a workshop at the Metal Museum or SLOS Summer Youth, whatever, and doesn't continue on, they have still actually learned through allegory. Like there's so much allegory embedded in our process, cleverly disguised in captivating fire, right? We freely admit, like we use what you got, but there, you know, the simple recognition of like, this is an intimidating process because it's so new and there is inherent risk, right? But you did it. So what happens the next time you face a daunting situation, like metal casting or not, right? You've gained that like little bit of confidence, just being able to look back and be like, I did that, so maybe I can conquer this, right? Or I learned that I actually am interested in the mechanics of something, and so I'm not going to dismiss that anymore, right? There's so much that can be taken away, whether that's instantly or sort of in broad long-term thinking, that these programs that provide any kind of new activity to youth, I think are just so valuable. So especially those who may not otherwise be college bound, right? I mean, that's really what we're dealing with if we're talking about cost and accessibility. So,
Yeah. Well, I think we've reached that point when we should open up the chat to questions. So I would certainly love to hear from the participants today, the attendees who have been following along. If anybody would like to chime in with a question, I will be waiting. Anyone? And while we're waiting, I thought I have the luxury of knowing what slides are in the PowerPoint. And I thought I would go back to this
great.
slide and start the question off by talking about, you've talked about a little bit of your own autobiographies of like falling in love with casting and the ways that, of course, you're both educators. So like the way you've taken these experiences and grown and been able to share them with others and teach others this craft. But I am still curious about sort of the empowerment that you both found over time growing into your role as artists in addition to education, but like particularly as an artist, like how you've sort of taken this experience and growth and how it reflects in your art.
Do I have to go because that's me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, see, now Kevin Vanek has a question. I'll answer really quickly. So I actually was very comfortable with like developing my role as an artist. I have been like, as from before I could speak, right? I'm going to be an artist when I grow up. I don't have a problem with that one. I had a really hard time with the idea of educator. I made my career working in professional fine art foundries, and I was really comfortable as a technician. And then somebody, 15 years ago came and said, will you teach a foundry class at MassArt? And I said, sure, not really understanding what that meant. And those first batches of students really deserve a refund. But I was teaching a class and still working full time at the foundry. But I'm still actually uncomfortable in that role of, I'm a very proud educator, but I don't believe that I should be anyone's role model, right? I'm just a misfit metal caster that swears a lot and like, don't look up to me. But now I have these students that like the way that I revere my professors, I can't, no. I'm real good at making fun of myself, which is what we're seeing on the screen, but I'm not really good at being a role model. That's my answer. Go, Stacey.
And same, I popped out of the womb as an artist, like just always drawing, and I knew that's what I was going to do. It wasn't until I would help my fellow students in undergrad that I realized I actually did want to teach, because I just like sharing knowledge as well as receiving it. And then I think I literally have the best job for me ever, because I like to consider myself a problem solver, and all I get to do all day long is help other people solve problems. Like each assignment you give is a problem that needs a solution. And then I can help them come up with a million different ways of how to approach it, how to do a process, and so it just keeps me thinking, keeps me going, keeps me learning, because sometimes I don't know that process and I don't know. Let's look it up. Let's see how it's done. I've never poured, I've never made whatever out of Jolly Ranchers, but let's try and find a YouTube video and then let's play around with it. And so I think that it's just, yeah, it is the perfect thing for me. I don't know about being anybody's role model or anything too, but I never thought of it like that. I was just like, I'm just here to help you guys do what you do.
You're welcome.
Right. Yes, thank you, Marjee. But I mean, if I have students that think of me like I thought of my professors, which is the world, I owe them my entire life just because of how much love and support I've gotten from them. And I just that makes me feel a little weird, Marjee.
You're welcome. No, and I mean, it ties into this whole idea of the family tree, right? I mean, my professors are family. Both Carolyn and George are family, right? I mean, and that's
the bridge.
Yeah.
Show the bridge.
So, but it kind of messes with my head a little bit to think about the fact that like I am now that person. And you know, yeah, there's got to be more questions than us just rambling, self-deprecating.
There's a big question. I'm looking for the bridge and I'm
think it
wondering.
passed.
Oh, here it is. Here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's
Okay.
both of our professors.
Both of our professors,
Yeah.
John Beasley and Wayne Potratz.
Yeah.
Two lovely, lovely men.
Yeah.
Okay, what are the
And
questions?
okay, so this is a question from a student of Kevin Vanek. The student is wondering what it is like as a film caster at residencies and such that are quote unquote male run and may not be a place that actively takes women's problems seriously. How do you find a safe balance in those spaces? And then parentheses, want it or not, you're both my role models.
I would say, well, I haven't done a lot of residencies, but I can imagine the situation. And I mean, don't wait for somebody to give you a solution. You find a solution. I mean, that's in my opinion. I'm like, here's what I need in order to do what I need to do here. And so you can either help me or we'll find a way to do it together. But I wouldn't expect somebody to come up with a solution for me. I would just try and figure it out, because that I don't know what they mean by like what like needs you would need as a female, but just as like an individual has different needs. And so if I, I can't work on the floor very well. I need to work on a table. I need to work up, because if I'm bending down, my vertebrae is going to kill me and I'm not going to be happy and I'm not going to want to work. So if I'm, trying to figure out how to make it work for you, I mean, by you providing solutions that they can help you with.
I like that answer. I haven't done a lot of residencies, but I think that something in general, I mean, I worked in a welding shop when I was younger out in Oregon that genuinely didn't have a bathroom that I could use, right, within the shop. So I had to go like out into the front office, and it was like, well, like I'm looking at my disgustingly dirty hands and going, if y'all are okay with this, I'm okay with it, right? Like this is where you start othering where I feel like I could start othering myself. It's like, if I start making a big fucking stink about how there's no women's bathroom, that's all that people are hearing. Whereas like, if I'm as long as there's something that works, right, and we can find a solution, as Stacey said, and that's the perfect way to look at it, then that's how I've always gone about things, right?
I also try and bring everything that I think I need, because I don't want to go like searching for a drill. I want my drill.
Yeah.
And I know where my things are and I know what I have, and I try and bring everything I could possibly think of I might need.
Yeah.
Like last time I brought a step stool, and it was the best thing I ever did, because at some point I'm always like, I need a cinder block to stand on because I can't see inside this mold because I've got it too tall on the table, So I think that like, and I was like, I need to bring this step stool every time now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's a really big difference between like asking and like demanding, right? That, like, I have to have this. Well, you may want that, right? But you don't necessarily have to have that. I think it's a mindset issue for me. But I would be really curious if this student, not right now, but if there's a specific example of, whoever asked this question from Kevin's student, like if there's a really specific, like something that you needed and it wasn't provided for you, like that's something that you brainstorm out, especially after the fact, and then you know better next time.
Yeah.
Right. I'm always happy to answer those questions.
Well, Kevin just said that I just validated her prepared packing mayhem. Welcome to the club. I'm right there with you. I over prepare, but I am always happy I did. There's always one thing I forget though. Always one thing. I can't remember what it was this last time at Fire, but there was one thing where I was like, very good. Almost have it to perfection.
It's because you didn't have my 5 spreadsheets.
Right. Yes. Yes. I see. I don't have a spreadsheet. I just go like this in the studio and start grabbing stuff and making a pile.
Well, we are almost out of time, but oh, it's actually 2 o'clock. I know some people may need to rush off and get to other meetings. I do want to give an opportunity to you both to address a comment that you made about working smarter when you were younger, in case there's students still listening. So just if you could give advice about, preventative measures that you can take when you're younger so you have fewer health issues or aches and pains as you age in the craft of casting.
100% don't be the tough guy. You don't have to be the tough guy because I was like, I could do it and I could at the time, but I can't anymore. And it's probably because I wanted to be the tough guy.
Just because you can doesn't mean that you should.
Yes. And work smarter, not harder. Wayne would constantly say that to me because he's like, Holloway, why aren't you using the crane? And I'm like, because I can lift it. And he's like, work smarter, not harder. And I wish I would have listened to him a little bit more now.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing else to add. There's no secret tip to it except just use your brain instead of your body, right? And there are times where you have to use your body, and then you get as many people as you need to go help you. And that's a big one that again is so part of our culture that like everybody just assumes that we're all going to ask each other for help, right? Because we can't do any of this. It's the same as the choreography on the pour field. We can't do any of this in isolation. So like you need to ask 3 people to help you, get something up onto a cart. That's fine because they're going to ask you next week to do something else, right? So asking for help and not struggling. Like the minute you start to struggle, you're doing something dumb.
Yeah. Or even just like I work so much by myself in my studio on some pretty big pieces. And I don't have like a lot of equipment that I would have at school. And so I think sometimes I just think of like, okay, how'd they do this back in the day before there were machines? And so there's the log system where you roll something over a log, or just leveraging things a little bit different with like a pipe or something like that. I think that thinking of those kinds of things, if you don't have anybody around to help, is really smart too. And just, I mean, nowadays we have YouTube, so I'm just like YouTubing everything all the time. I know how to fix every part of my truck because of YouTube, because some Bill guy on YouTube told me how to, so I think that there's always stuff like that.
I think one thing that I talk about a lot is understanding the physics of your own body, right? And that's going to be different for everybody. But like understanding how you can actually stabilize your body to not be taxing another part, right? So if you're trying to like adjust something on a table that you need leverage for, then like you brace your hip against the table and like let the rest of your body help you instead of just using your arms, right? And it's the same with your back. Everyone knows that you use your legs, right, instead of your back. But it's the same. Like I've had to tell students to like plant their feet, right? There's like you put your feet shoulder width apart and like feel the ground. But then you're like using muscles in your feet. It's not just your quads, right? But once you understand like how you can use your body to the best of its advantage and what that limitation is, then you just have to listen. It'll tell you. It'll tell you what it can do. As will any furnace. Gotta listen.
Well, on that note, I think we should say thank you again to both of you, Stacey and Marjee. Thank you for your time and for sharing your perspectives and advice. And I will leave the chat open a little bit longer in case anybody has one last burning question. But otherwise, please join me from near and far in thanking our 2 artists in today's conversation. I'll be the one clapping. And the next conversation will be on July 18th. Same place. You can find the link on the exhibition website for casting, branching out. And it'll be a conversation between Brian Massey, who teaches sculpture at University of Central Arkansas, and Desmond Lewis, who teaches sculpture at Yale University and is also on our board of directors. And I hope to see you all there. Thanks again, everyone.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Thanks, Stacey.
No, thank you for.
Ooh, that's a lot of
Sorry, I think-
exclamation points.
Yeah, that's a lot of, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Laura, for having us, inviting us to
Oh, sure.
this, and
I'll stop
after-
recording.